We are really fortunate that our next speaker is Gregory K. Hunt, FAIA, architect and educator. His long-standing interest in Charles Goodman's work began when he was a faculty member at Virginia Tech's Washington Alexandria Center, an urban extension of Tech's College of Architecture and Urban Studies that was and is still located here in Alexandria. Together with Jim Ritter, a local architect and then adjunct professor at the center, Greg co-curated and mounted a small exhibit of Goodman's work at the center, then located above the People's Drugstore at the corner of King and North Columbus Streets. That was in 1986. After visiting Mr. Goodman at his home and office on Quaker Lane in Alexandria to select material for this exhibition, Professor Hunt offered to inventory Goodman's extensive collection of drawings. Given the astonishing volume of work Goodman's small firm had produced over the years prior to his retirement, and its importance to the introduction of modern architecture to the Washington, D.C. area, Professor Hunt anticipated a lengthy task ahead of him. In the end, a year of visits to the Goodman home and office, Greg produced a handwritten inventory comprising 158 legal-sized pages. Later, he interviewed Mr. Goodman about his life and work. That project resulted in the production of 8 audio cassettes recorded over a 10-month period. 18 audio cassettes recorded over a 10-month period. That was in 1988. From residential communities, private homes, schools, churches, apartment buildings, office buildings, and prefabricated structures, Goodman's professional work, while varied in building type, program, budget, and location, clearly embraced modernist tendencies in both their design and realization. Greg has titled today's presentation, Charles M. Goodman, FAIA, and the American House. Greg, we are so profoundly grateful to you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Mimi, for that nice introduction. Not only are we in an elegant, wonderful neoclassical space, but it's nice to see the termination of over a year's planning on the part of many individuals, including Elizabeth Lardner, Elizabeth must be here, and Mimi and many, many others. So congratulations for a job well done, even though we're not finished yet. Now, how do I, isn't it supposed to go ahead?
Big green
Where's the fellow? Where's the AV guy?
Cameron.
No, wait, how do you?
button on the,
That's what I pushed.
Green.
Yeah. Nothing. Wouldn't you know it? It's always the last person.
Uh-oh. Hey, Cameron.
I'm coming.
Where'd he go?
He's probably having lunch. Oh. What did we do wrong? I didn't push any buttons. I just pushed the green one.
Oh,
You know, you can't exist without guys
something
like this.
up here got pressed.
What happened?
Something was pressed up there.
Oh. Okay, there it is. Well. To get the people at the speaker, you have to get him to. A pleasure to be here today. I'm going to be doing a lot in a little time, and I've already messed this up. How do I go back? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, we're good.
No, I thought that was the pointer. Oh, that's the pointer. Oh, okay. Sorry. We'll get it. We'll get it. I was attracted to this photograph as the first slide only because it has one tool from an architect's toolkit that, well, more than one, but the one you probably all know if you're an architect is the Luxo lamp. in the foreground, and I see some smiles. But in any event, it's a great photograph done by Robert Lautman, who was probably the best person that documented Charles Goodman's, this thing falls off too. This is going to be taxing. Hold on. Career. In any event, it shows us tools of the trade, and please note, all of you, that there is no computer evident. Not that I have anything wrong with computers, but sorry. Okay. In any event, I'm going to start by trying to convey the importance of understanding architecture in terms of a bigger context than just a building on a piece of land. And by that I mean, if you think about the war, Holland Hills is my first project, but Holland Hills starts in about 1946, 47. And you can read it, but we don't have a bouncing ball, but I'm going to ask you to look at it both on the screen and listen to my. Housing demand in the United States in 1945 was indeed intense, 15 years of depression, et cetera. With 10 million veterans, men and women returning from the European and Pacific theaters of war in 45 and 46, new households were forming, yet the shortage of units meant millions of veterans' families were sharing with relatives or finding contemporary shelters in cars, et cetera. The call to the suburbs was immediate. It was alluring. It was something that most people wanted to achieve, and it was something that was taken up as a cause, if you will, in many magazines. And I'm going to talk about national publications in a moment. But these are some examples from magazines, the Small Homes Guide, and then another one, I think, from Life magazine, possibly. And I want you to look at the GI on the bench with his girlfriend or wife, sketching a little house in the sand. I'd like you to remember that image, because I'm going to refer to it later on in another slide. But the yearning to go to the suburbs had to be met with large construction projects. And Richard, I think, very admirably stated that. And he also showed the same picture from Time magazine as this one. But it's true that in the 40s and 50s, a group of people called merchant builders, who built 100 units per year or more, were considered the dominant supplier of these homes. Most of the post-war improvements in production, organization, and techniques were made by this group. Now, a little personal anecdote. I remember viewing Charles Goodman's records or correspondence and papers at the American Institute of Architecture headquarters here in Washington years ago, many years ago. And my understanding, and it doesn't surprise me, is that he was turned down for FAIA fellowship mainly because he worked with merchant builders. For an architect to team up with a person that did subdivisions and built buildings by the hundreds or the thousands, that was an unacceptable marriage. And it was frowned upon both in the press and I think by people in general, more for sure. So Bill Levitt was considered the Henry Ford of housing. And I think this pithy remark says a lot. Any fool can build homes. What counts is how many you can sell for how little. So the price of merchant builders' products were key because the higher the volume, obviously, the lower the cost, and the more you could build. Now, it's interesting that none of us, Jody and Richard and myself, saw each other's slides before today. And I promise you that's true. But he showed the same slide, I think, as the one on the left. But I want to just point out a couple of things. In the homes on the left, the Cape Cod version of the Levitt home in 1947, it was a Cape Cod. According to this little advertisement, the only difference that you could make client A to client B to client C, is the kind of window, where they were placed, the color of the paint. Those were the three essential changes that you had available to you. Now think about that, remember that when we talk about Holland Hills and this matter of choice of what people could move into as a home. The roof line was the other one. You could get the roof on the ranch roof, or you could get the Cape Cod roof. And you notice a little turn at the gutter. I don't know what they did about that, the gutter system, but there are no downspouts. But I guess they didn't care about it. It wasn't really that important. But the slide on the right, I've got some captions here that I have to. Okay. The one on the right, yeah, I wasn't sure how these were going to come out in terms of the size of the text, but has a very, very interesting caption. Quote, Levitt offered 5 Cape Cod models, which all had the same floor plan but differed in window size, number and placement, house color, and roof line. The dream house, the caption for the one on the right is, the photograph on the left says, dream house for a new homeowner with wife and children, Levittown, New York, 1948. This housing represents the safe haven of building homes as retreats for male workers and as a workplace and as workplaces for their wives. Yeah, that was printed on the sales brochure, and it's printed right there. That was Life magazine in 1950. Now, speaking of magazines, sorry, okay. The popular press and the professional press were two major instruments taken collectively as a whole, through which the dissemination of the products of architects, designers, interiors, whatever, and merchant builders became known to people in this country. Some of these magazines, Ladies' Home Journal, for example, started in the 1800s, about 1880 or 1888. So they had been around for a long time. They were influential, and you have to remember, television didn't come in until the 50s, late 40s, early 50s. Most people didn't have them. So the popular press, if you will, was the main disseminator, if you will, of information about not only John Foster Dulles, shown on the right, or some of the heads of state over there on the left in the Life magazine. But people subscribed to them in great numbers, and their length of life, if you will, was quite remarkable in the history of American culture. The professional press, I show you here, Progressive Architecture, Arts and Architecture, that John Antenza was the publisher that Richard spoke about in the bottom. Architectural Forum, the Journal of the American Institute of Architects, Architectural Record. They were highly instrumental not only in advertising, I'm going to get to that in a minute, but also in spreading the work achieved by architects and builders around the country. And one of the things that we have to remember is that war production did several things. First of all, it tied up most of the material for building in the 1940s. It was very difficult, for example, if you wanted to build a steel house. Let's take the Farnsworth house that Richard showed in Plano, Illinois. That consists of a number of I-beams, plug welded at the top with a channel, a steel channel. Well, those are very, very hard to get because most of the material had to be used for the war. And so wood became, I think, clearly the dominant material. But I show the war production images, not just of the women that were, of course, volunteering gladly for the war effort, but they're working on the upper left, working on plastic or plexiglass nose cones. There were wooden propellers. Plywood was very, very well used, or much used, I should say, in aviation, spruce goose, things like that. So there were materials coming out of the factories for the war that architects and designers eyed, I think, very carefully. We showed, I think Richard showed and I don't remember the name of the chair, but the grommets that hold the back of the seat of one of his dining chairs, Charles Eames I'm talking about here, was developed in the factories for the war. So people like Charles and Ray Eames really had their noses close to, and their eyes close to factory production in the sense that they were able to follow the technical and technological changes and revisions that were coming about and discoveries that were coming about in the factories. Plywood for war, later on for peace. Now, this is where the advertisers for the magazines, and I should say, I'm going to just go off script a little bit here. When Richard talked about the Arts and Architecture magazine, which I remember as a student of architecture reading faithfully, it was a marvelous assessment and coverage of contemporary design, that the advertisers were the factor that made or broke, or would break, sorry, the magazines. In other words, one of the reasons that John Intenza, I think, eventually sold it is that he ran out of advertisers. And if you without the advertising, the revenue from advertising, you couldn't have a paper or a magazine. So the advertisers, and I'm showing you here two here, the Ream company that made plywood, and the McDonnell, later to become McDonnell Douglas, I would imagine, we're talking about advertising plastic for the nose cones of fighter planes. Well, we all know that plastic was extremely important in the post-war efforts, particularly in furniture design. But that leads me to this slide, which is of the Air Transport Command, one of Goodman's earlier projects. You know that he did National Airport, and I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk really about 3 different projects, but this is just a summary, a preface, if you will. But there's a lot in this building. This was for the Army Air Forces. They had a $500,000 budget. It was at the Washington Port of Aerial Embarkation. It was used as a transit hub for worldwide operations and received and shipped out machine parts, wounded soldiers, all kinds of materiel all over the world. And as this slide indicates, 4 months after the order was signed to start construction, the building was ready. So to do that, and Goodman was the architect. He had worked at National Airport, and I'm not going to talk about that one, but I'm going to talk about this building because if you look at the slides, it's pretty clear that the window wall, it's going to appear as I think, one of the primary factors in the development of the Holland Hills House that follows soon, starts here, in my judgment. And I'm going to show you why in the next slide. But the chief construction simplification, reading on the slide oh, that's coming up, sorry. This one. Yeah. Okay. The chief construction simplification and the architect's use of a 5'4" module by which all windows, doors, and smaller structural parts were sized to drop into the structure's 16 by 16-foot wooden gridwork. No steel, all wood. This framing freed both interior and exterior walls of wall-bearing requirements, paid off in flexibility, and permitted the use of glass for 75% of the exterior walls of the building. Now, the Holland Hills window, in my view, begins here. What he was able to do was on the outside wall, he found a way to put these awning windows mounted on the outside of the structural wall that holds the glass. In other words, the verticals. So he has a grid of here ventilating windows. 75% of the exterior of the building was glass. The building, I don't know its lifespan, but it was torn down totally after the war. Its use finally declared unnecessary. Goodman designed a chain of filling stations for Washington. This is among them. And I know Eric Jenkins, who's a wonderful drawer, will probably confirm that the size of, it's a funny drawing because perspectively, the gas tanks can't be, the machines to read the gas in the car are way out of proportion in this. If you see that, look at it carefully. But the main thing is, it has two essential architectural components, a roof and window walls, glass walls, exterior walls, all glass, very, very thin, slight columns on the inside. And you can see that in the showroom shown here much more clearly. I have no idea where this was, but this was probably in the 40s, is my guess, late 40s, mid 40s. But you see the column, the tapers, it's probably steel with wood on the outside. Total transparency. What holds up the roof are those tiny columns that sneak inside. You can see the one post in the foreground out in front. A very, very thin roof, pierced with squares for sunlight to go through the roof, and which would shade it as well. But really quite an elegant piece of modern architecture for sure. Open, transparent, et cetera. Now we talked about the press. And excuse me for a second. Everything falls off this desk, that's the problem. Okay. We're going to come to Holland Hills in a minute, but just to get the sort of lay of the land, if you will, from the popular press, in this case books, so we had periodicals and books as publications that were really highly informative to the home buyer in this particular, and all residences for that matter, at this time in the 40s. In This American House Today by Catherine Ford and Tom Creighton, a quiet revolution has taken place in residential design in the last decade, which deserves to be documented. A quiet revolution. Briefly, the revolt has been this. It has swept away the need for thinking in static terms of tightly enclosed, inward-looking rooms. And it has substituted the privilege of using free, open, outward-looking space. Now you notice the choice of words, the freedom of choice. The freedom of choice. When Bob Davenport, who was with the Department of Agriculture, decided to start, he had worked in Toxmont down on off of Fort Hunt Road below current Holland Hills. I found two quotes, one by the developer and one by the architect, that I think are worth mentioning, and I have them before you now. Davenport, when I purchased Holland Hills land, I was confronted with a challenge to build an outstanding community. You notice the word, it's not just an outstanding number of houses, it's a community, an aggregation of individual residences. The land was located in what was then a rural part of the county. Fort Hunt Road was a narrow, unpaved road. No public utilities existed. The natural beauty of the land had to be retained. I was an idealist who wanted to build a community. Second time he's used that term. I could be proud of. I began my search for the best land planner available. Several sources recommended Charles Goodman. He was retained to prepare an initial site plan so we could proceed with our final financial plans. The creative nature of his site plan was carefully followed. Goodman. These were recollections published in a Holland Hills memo, and not memo, but little booklet, pamphlet. I don't know when. I'm sorry to say. I apologize for not knowing. Probably 20 years afterwards. So memory, fogging, whatnot might intervene, but nonetheless, it's worth reading. Here's Goodman. The memory of my first visit to a large tract of land fronting on Fort Hunt Road to meet Bob Davenport, the developer, is still vivid. It was heavily wooded and enigmatic. We started walking through the woods and suddenly noticed that we were climbing as we walked. We reached the top where a broad view of the valley confronted us. This, said Bob Davenport, is to be Holland Hills, a community of single-family homes. My creative juices began flowing wildly. It was the kind of land that home builders avoided. They never wanted to spend the money, and when confronting and thinking about the bulldozer going through to make roads and slicing through the contours, et cetera, that home builders avoided. To me, it was perfect land for residential living in a setting of natural beauty that should be preserved at all costs in the process of development. It was wooded, rugged, hilly, and with no roads. This is what Holland Hills was to grow in and maintain. If you look at the site plan, this is one of the early ones, several things about the roads. We've already heard about the FHA and its prohibitions of this, that, and the other thing. Well, one of the battles that Charles Goodman and Davenport had to take on was with the FHA. They wanted to have curving streets, as you can see here. There are very few straight streets. Cul-de-sacs, safety, curving streets and cul-de-sacs as well would hold the speeds of car to a minimum. He wanted it to appear country-like. The second thing is you can perhaps see these were dedicated parks, and as I understand it, they're still there, that were open to all people for walking trails, et cetera. I understand there was a water issue with one of them. I'm not sure which one, but Davenport decided to give those to the community free of charge, so to speak, as just natural elements to be left alone. Don't build on them. You can see them, you can walk through them, et cetera. Another thing was you can look at the outlines of the plots of land themselves, which are, oops, sorry. Oh. What do I do?
Trying to go back.
Push what? Oh, the green one here? No. Oh, this, the little one? I'm sorry. I live on an island off of Seattle, and I just don't get out much. Which green one?
The big green.
Well, that's what I was doing.
You want that slide?
Oh, no. How do I go back?
Okay, the red.
Oh, I see. Red to go. Okay. Thank you, Mimi. The other thing, there we go, the magic dot. Here's Fort Hunt Road. Now, this is the early one. The entrance was here. Is that still Paul Spring Road? Okay. I lived there for a while, but I forget. There was going to be a shopping center here. That's where the pool is now. And a school, a primary school. The primary school was built, and indeed... Oh, I'm sorry. The primary school was built, sorry about that, later on, but that's the first site plan. I'm not going to point out all of the areas, but you can see the number of cul-de-sacs and curving roads, and nearly all of them are like that. And Goodman had a tough battle with, he wanted the roads to be gravel. FHA said, no way. No. So they're macadam, but he wanted no sidewalks, and there aren't any sidewalks. Now, the new Holland Hills was obligated by law to put in sidewalks down by Elba Road, and that section, it's not showing here, it would be on the upper right-hand side of the slide, way up at the top and down the hill. So they lost that battle. But he said that the curved roads did follow the site contours to slow down the traffic. And I said, no, and just swales for water runoff. And Goodman said, with regard to the paved road, and this gives you, I think, a very, very good sense of his feelings for the roads, certainly. I regret the necessity for installing a paved road, not only because it's a conspicuous expense, but also because of its hard city-like character, reflecting great heats in the summer and creating ice hazards in the winter. So he had his own pragmatic, or at least it was embraced and shrouded in pragmatics, reason for doing it that way. Okay. Now, if we look at, there's been some talk about carports and things. If you, this is, I've forgotten this road. Does anybody know? This is, what? Okay, whatever you said. This is Popkins Lane. That's my old house right there. But a couple of things to look at. I used to think you were a nice person. Sorry, they should have the lavaliers, but I don't get out much, you know. But in any event, here's a custom house. I've forgotten the name of it, but that you could buy in addition to, or instead of, I should say, instead of the typical models that Davenport had in his sales book, you could buy a lot and build your own house. This was designed by, I've forgotten the name of the house, but that was a custom. But here, Skinner? Skinner, S-K-I-N-N-E-R. What? One of the what?
Skinner, one of the custom houses.
Oh, yeah, yes, thank you. The custom houses, right. Now, we talked about carports and changes. You see here, there's a little sort of set of bents, wood frames, that mark the entrance, and there's a little parking, or no, that might be a storage shed, but there's a parking structure. Where did I see it? You can see one. There used to be one. It got removed. Well, I don't know. I can't see it. But some people did require them or want them later on. And Goodman had a solution. The solution was simple. You simply build a carport freestanding, and you have a fence with vertical louvers that were angled at 45 degrees to sort of architecturally connect it to the house itself. But there you can, oh, here's one. Here, I found one. Right there. Road comes up, boom, right there for the carport. But most of them did not have it. Now, he designed uphill units and downhill units. And now we're going to talk about the units. I can figure out what to do here. Okay, the first unit house is a number 2. Excuse me, a number 1. Number 2, I always thought this was number 1, but this is I thought this was number 2, it's number 1. This is for slope sites, and as you can see in the photo here, the upper level, the lower level, it has a middle level as well. I have a plan coming up. I'll switch back and forth. Okay, so, shoot. Okay. This part, there's too many things to do, for God's sake. This thing, this. So this is the part that's in the hill. So this would be earth. And the site drops off from here to here. And above it would be the living room here. It's at a half level. So you enter on the first level, the lower level. You come up here, and you come up to a study and a living room. The bottom has a multi-use and a kitchen. So this would be dining, et cetera, kitchen here, little windows, big windows. We'll see that in a second. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, so that's in the hill. Small windows, big window, big window, big window. So even in the bedrooms, you got 1 for ventilation, and you got 2 for view, you know. And they were all done on a module. Well, we have details coming. Details coming, Mike. I wanted to show at least, can you see okay? An interior. One of the things about, if you look at the book on Holland Hills, is a section about interiors. And most architects doing modern architecture at the time, and most clients, chose furniture that always let the space go under it. You notice that there's no apron that goes down to the floor under the couch nor underneath these seats right here. Wood floors, natural materials, used brick, supposedly initially purchased by Davenport from a building being torn down in Baltimore, in Maryland, and then later obtained from other places. But what, in preparing this talk, God, I'll just never get this right. This is a slide that I found. Well, I made the slide, but I found an illustration from one of his Davenport's old rental, the showcase books, the books that you'd look at to buy a house. Well, it turns out, apparently, that Goodman envisioned having a house like this where the upper level, you can see all the windows, was over a carport. I had never seen it before. I didn't know anything about that. My guess, and it's a guess only, is that it proved to be too expensive for the first model of one of the two kinds of houses, the one and the two, those two models. But it was quite advanced. The road did stop here. You had to back out. I mean, it had some problems, for sure. But this would have been considerably more expensive given the technologies and I should say the techniques of stick frame building at the time. The unit plan number 2, do you remember the soldier that drew the house in the sand? If you get a child to draw a house in most of the Western, I should say, in the United States, put it that way, have two things. It's going to have a pitched roof, and it's going to have a chimney. What Goodman did, in my view, is he took those solidly established physical attributes of an American house and used them as the anchor here, the chimney, large, way beyond what it had to be, but that's why he included a wood box behind it, which you'll see in a minute. And then the long row of glass, all built on a module, the thin roof, but the pitched roof. Now, Goodman attended at the Baltimore Museum of Art, I think in the 40s or 50s, a symposium, and he gave the introductory paper. It had Marcel Breuer and Dan Kiley and others. But he said during that, hang on. No, I'll paraphrase it. He said that he had just finished reading a report from the government that said that the value of a house was directly proportionate to the pitch of the roof. Now, people really believe that kind of thing. For instance, people in the FHA, the more pitched the roof was, it would be a baronial manor, it would be more valuable, more expensive, of course. But so be it. That's what he said. Sorry, this is a little. So this is house number 2. A simple vocabulary of forms, for sure. In plan, there are a couple of things that I think are worth noting. He was big on choices, and you'll see in the later houses, he expands the dining room to put a storage unit right here by the entrance porch. But staying with this one, it's living room, kitchen, dining, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. Tiny house, 1,150 square feet, I think it was, 1,050 square feet, priced at $12,800. I was just wondering if anybody's about to make a bid on one of these houses. And I thought perhaps maybe I should withdraw the slide. But there are some clever things about this. You notice the entrance porch is paved, it's covered, so the roof is coming along here. There's a column to hold it up, but look at the paving. The paving starts typically outside, where you rub snow off your boots and things like that. But it goes in to become the hearth. And a lot of people felt at the time that when you had the dining room right here, this is a strange place to put the entrance door to the house. But in fact, it's really not, because the minute if you have to go to the bedrooms, you just go right down here. So it's pretty clear. Bedrooms, you could, in terms of unit types, if you added 4 feet, Goodman had figured out that if you added 4 feet, let's say, to the bedrooms or to the living room, that changed the model of the house. I'm going to give you a chart that shows the types of units and how he defined that particular part. But the living room, although it's small, again, 1,050 square feet, 1,100 square feet in that area, but quite well developed. This is the possibility of a screen coming out to a carport, possibly here. You see the diagonal louvers. So main entrance, side entrance, into the kitchen. Kitchen was fairly large. In some later units, this is open, so that I lived in one of the 2-story units on Popkins, and that had an opening right here from the kitchen out into the living room, which was quite nice. And then the large bank of equally spaced windows all along there. And that I think I showed you in this one. You can see it all here. Now, obviously these, Mike, these houses couldn't be sited in every possible way. You wanted to have the large wall, presumably facing not north, but south. And in terms of ventilation, some of these, every other one roughly, were operable windows, awnings or casements, depending on the house later on, and fixed glass above. In terms of ventilation, there were presumably, I didn't have one in my house, but an attic fan that would draw the hot air in through these windows and exhaust it up through the roof. It wasn't air conditioning, but it actually did condition the air in that sense. It moved it around. Oh, wait. If you look at this house under construction, this is one of the houses I just showed you, the number 2, the used brick. And you notice here, the windows are different, mainly because they wanted to have an apron above the kitchen sink, which would be right behind here. So that would raise the sill, and he wanted to have the sill, both the break in the door for the handle and for the windows here, the operable windows, which are now vertical casements, outswinging, and a little door pad. This is a door to go in. So it's the same language of construction. They were all roof trusses that could be built off-site. The windows were fenestra, I think, John, you told me? I had read somewhere in an article that they were Hope's windows, which I always thought was a little bit silly because it couldn't have been, because they were the Cadillac of windows at the time. And then inside, you could see, looking up the hill here from breakfast, you notice that the storage was really minimal. These would be dishes and things like that. These are presumably masonry windows, masonite, sliding masonite. You could drop this little bamboo curtain down for privacy if you wanted. Small, intimate, but brick here. No, I'm sorry, not brick here. Brick is down here at the, but you could sit here and look up and get good ventilation, and that's the horizontal part of the window. So necessity, obviously, the fact that the kitchen had to have a higher windowsill was always part of the formula for the Goodman houses. You wouldn't do it just for visual effect. The third house I wanted to show you quickly is the utility core house. It's a house and home, and I wanted to get this in 2 pieces because you notice this utility core plan sells the most advanced builder house in the United States. Now, how about that for popular press advertising? You can't beat it, right? I mean, it's phenomenal. The house was, I think all architects, from the day they're born, want to do a square house or a square building. It's just something that's, they just have to do it. Now this, I think, was about 8 inches or a foot short of being, it's like 36 by 35 or something like that, but it was close enough. 3 zones, living, dining, living room. You notice storage here, first time that happens as an integral part of the house. A utility core, the services, sleeping. 3 zones of the house. Flat roof, which was, what? What do you mean flat roof? What do you mean by flat roof? You know, that's too advanced, that's radical. Houses have to have sloped roofs, you know, FHA, but he got it through. But it also means that the circulation here is simple to the bathrooms. You don't have to come out through the public spaces, and you come through the kitchen, which is the sort of hinge point of that circulation system. But gangs of windows, a column here, but here and here, the long one. So full of light, even in the bedrooms, entire glass walls, 3 of them, as you can see here. This is the structure, and in the middle, FHA was really worried about having bathrooms that couldn't be ventilated. Well, he put a core he put a fan, in this little thing up here, this little penthouse sort of thing with light coming down, and that would bring the air out as well from the house. Simple, straightforward, and this one was I don't have the cost of this, I'm sorry, Type 5A. But the fact that it was the most advanced builder's house is quite remarkable. Here it is in plan. Again, you see the fireplace now is inboard, most likely because he felt that would just be a carbuncle on the exterior elevation. That's just my language, not his. He wouldn't use carbuncle. He'd probably use a French term. But in any event, it's inward, so you face inward. You get light from outside and view out to the outside. There's all the storage, the bath, and you see the exhaust fan above and a skylight. So when you walk out here, you don't have direct access to windows, but you get light, natural light coming in all during the day, depending on the track of the sun. This is really quite tight here, as you can see, but in addition to the storage, not only to increase the perimeter of the house to get the square, but certainly necessary. In fact, he had said that it didn't make any sense to him to put storage space inside of a house because it would be too expensive, so you might as well just build it outside or do it this way. Now, I talked about choices. Remember that Bill Levitt said, or someone from his advertising company said, you can have this kind of window and you can place it here, this kind of paint, blah, blah, blah. Goodman really thought about real differences that were meaningful to living and to life. So he comes up with split-level houses. You see that the number 2, there were 9 basic house plans and variants. And doing the math is a little tricky, and I won't go into it, but that gives you an idea of the types of, when you see 2B4, 2LB, that means they added 4 feet to the bedroom and 4 feet probably to the living room, is my guess. But that's what that meant. Always 4, because he could say, okay, that's going to cost you another X. It's like taking a knife through the house and computing the cost and saying, that'll cost you another $850, but you can do it. And it was easy enough to do in the field. But, and the notes at the bottom simply indicate that the plumbing was roughed in for future. And by the way, on the Levitt houses, that little Cape Cod house, you might have noticed that the family that they showed had 3 children. There was 1 bedroom on the ground floor, if I remember, 2 bedrooms on the ground floor. The upstairs in the attic was unfinished. And if you studied the elevation of that photograph that Jody showed, or Richard showed, sorry, the windowsill must have been about 6 inches off the floor. I mean, it was just, because it was a sloped roof, like a pitched roof like this. So, you know, one wonders about the efficacy of here it is. of that design. I'm still getting these things mixed up. Okay, so as time went on, he studied more roof types, the butterfly roof on the upper left. The one on the right, I'm not sure. John Burns would be is an expert on that. Is that a custom line? Oh, custom line. Okay, good guess. Another butterfly the long way. So butterfly short way, butterfly long way, and a two-story house for more room. So the question I think that's worth posing is that where do those designs come from? And I'm going to pick that up in just a minute after I talk about the landscaping. There were three landscape architects that worked over time. The first was Eric Pepke, who died in 1953, which is unfortunate. Second was Dan Kiley, and the third was Barney Voigt. And I'm going to talk about Barney Voigt later. But I'm not a landscape architect, but I believe this is Stafford Road. It ends in ORD, so I'm just assuming it's Stafford. And I'm not sure which houses these are. But this is an example of three typical, these are number two houses, I believe. Yes. And how the landscape plan, and I think this might be one of the early landscape plans by Eric Pepke. But you can see, well, you probably can't read it all, obviously, but gardens, tennis courts, there were playgrounds, play equipment in some of them. Now, these are three houses, but it gets into this quote by Barney Voigt. He's tried to tie one lot into the other so the landscaping would be effective and make the community look as though there are no individual lots but a beautiful park. And I'll tell you, in my view, that's one of the magical things about this community. No fences, no stone walls, no garden enclosures, to my knowledge. And that's because your house would share landscape with anybody within your viewing distance. And these are two pictures from Scott Wilson's house. Scott and Lucy Wilson, are they here? Yeah, I think they are. Because we rented that house from the Gretchen and Bailey Spencer for a year when they were out of town. And I believe these are both taken from the same place. But look at that view. That's your lawn, but then your lawn goes over there, and your lawn goes over there. And look at the trees. And even in the snow, well, this is simplistic, but it's sort of everybody's landscape is yours. It's a Japanese concept of landscape architecture called borrowed scenery. I'm not sure if that was something that Goodman realized right away, probably, but you should know that that's really where the conceptual origins of this kind of planning developed. So by 1953, when John Callender writes one of these popular press books, Before You Buy a Home, a good case could be made for Holland Hills being called the best single development in the country. That's not bad press. That's not bad press at all. It was awarded a citation of merit, one of many, an honor shared only with a scattered Eichler. The Eichler developments, and Richard touched on this in his talk in California, were much, much larger. But that's the only other development cited. And here was little 460 whatever houses in Holland Hills with that kind of an accolade. It's pretty impressive. It struck me that it would be useful. What time do I have? Till when? 12:30. Oh, 12:30. Wow. You sure it's 12:30? Your watch is slow. I think your watch is slow. No? He's not, while he's working on Holland Hills and other projects, he's tinkering with other clients. This was a townhouse proposed for Ray Thurman. And I don't know if you know Ray, well, let me just touch on the fact that certainly the historic preservation people would give plaudits to the relationship of the new and the old, wouldn't they? I mean, the proportions are picked up, et cetera, et cetera. I'm being a little snarky here, but clearly a modernist house for a fellow who in fact went on to retain Frank Lloyd Wright to design the Crystal development just above DuPont Circle in Washington that had a series of linked glass towers, shopping centers, an enormous multi-level parking garage on the last undeveloped, the last largest developed parcel to be developed parcel in Washington. But this was this little pied-à-terre that Goodman was asked to develop. So he had been working on that. And my suspicion is that, well, I'll assert that he tinkered through custom houses like this. In other words, one-off residences. He could start to experiment with roof overhangs, with the glazing going all the way up to the roof in the top right-hand slide, the columns with the reduced, the setback on the lower level. He was doing these things as private commissions, and I think, my guess is that he tried to figure out which of these ideas, or if any, could be applied to Holland Hills. Made sense, because it was a lab. It was really a laboratory. I think I have two more. Oh no, something happened. There were two, okay. Yeah, that one. That's another one. Coster House is a saddle roof, more or less, and look at the amount of glass, the glazing, with the Holland Hills windows, still, even here in the bedrooms. So the language is established, you see, and he could fit, depending on the budget for each of these houses, he could experiment with redwood or he did use plywood in some, and I've read that he invented Texture 111, but I don't think that's true. He did use that in his own home renovation in the 60s. But I'd like to turn now to a second priority. I'm going to do three. Of Hickory Cluster, or the Hill Cluster in Reston, the new town outside of Washington, D.C., that many of you are familiar with. And that apparently was completed in about 1964. I should have mentioned, by the way, let me go back. I'm sorry. I hate it when speakers do this, but of course yeah, okay. You see that? Most, if not all, of these renderings were done by Dave Condon, Kai's Condon in Florence. Now you saw Condon and, you saw Kai's and not our Kai's, but Lethbridge and another fellow as well. But he did a lot of those renderings, and he scribbled his name on them because this is the quality of the work he could do. And Goodman was an extremely talented draftsman and loved to draw, always did. But I just thought I'd point that out to you. Okay, so hang on. All right. So here we have three clusters of houses, very, very different. This was completed in 1964. Whittlesey and Conklin did the downtown part with the high-rise and the water. And then Clothiel Smith did one of the cluster developments, as did Charles Goodman. And Bob Simon, the developer, rather than have Goodman do everything or Smith do everything, he thought he'd get more architecture and better work out of having three architects on this project. But I was talking to a gentleman earlier about, this is the plan that shows, maybe it's the next one. Maybe it's the next one. This had a garage underneath. This had surface parking down here. And I thought this one was supposed to have, no, it didn't. That had surface parking as well. But you notice that there are houses that are in plan. They're attached, a very urban situation, of course. And the shapes are very different. This is more square. These are more like little brownstones, maybe 16 feet wide. Water courses running through. These were not built, as I understand it. But the one that had, this one that has a place for the cars to go through, I believe this is the one. That, for whatever reason, structural issues, they had to tear down the plaza on the roof here that gave access to these units because of structural failure. And that was a big problem for the Hickory cluster. You can learn about that in greater detail tomorrow if you go on that field trip. But okay, here's an early model, and I turned it so it's supposed to be oriented to the same way that the site plan was. But you can see they're 2 and 3 stories high. They're much more elaborate, if you will, than we saw in Holland Hills. But so were the prices. Now, this was done in the 1960s. A 3-story unit was 1,800 square feet, and that cost $36,000. So that's almost 3 times the cost of the Holland Hills house that we showed before. So here's the one with that I know would come in, you drive, you go underneath here. So underneath this part would be this big plaza with planters, would be the parking. You notice that most of these, or many, have either courtyards that are walled, to take advantage of a very verdant site, sloping from top to bottom, walking trails that connected the 3 clusters. But quite, as you'll find out in a moment, just like the 9+ variants of Holland Hills houses, there are quite a few variants in this. And that was something that was just fundamental to Goodman's thinking, is that you can't just have one size fits all. People are different. They want different kinds of living environments. Pretty simple. So you have to be prepared to give them. But you have to be able to give them within the form language of the whole, for the collective aesthetic, shall we say, but also made them affordable. So compared to Holland Hills, these are far more luxurious. A 14 by 27-foot living room, approaching a square, stair in the corner, dining on one level. This is a 3-level. And then you'd always track, and I had trouble trying to go through these things, but these little schematic diagrams tell us that that house has that plan. So there are only 2 of them, the whole thing. That seems odd. And when I talk about River Park, which is the next one, and then we're done. Okay. Still don't get this straight. Okay, so you had to have, obviously, here's a block of little row houses, if you will. But this has big utility and storage, dining, entrance here, and they're much more generous, much more generous. 3 bedrooms, right? I'm going to see if I can pick this up a little because I don't want to run out of time. Now, the form language is an architect's term for what are the constituent parts that make up the elevations of the house, or actually the physical nature of the house. Well, it's beam, beam, horizontal, columns. Columns are always, for non-architects, columns are vertical. Students, remember that. Columns are vertical and beams are horizontal, always. But you notice that in terms of the proportions, that these are much more heavily emphasized aesthetically than we've seen anywhere else. I'm not sure it's always a great success, and I'll mention that in a moment with one of the particular views I found. In this one, you can see that the language, these are concrete block columns here, and these are, I assume, precast concrete beams that fly across. Now, I think at the scale of this with a terrace, it's quite nice because these become windows without glass. If you're sitting up here in a terrace, you get a frame view of the landscape. So the structure is actually framing your view of the landscape. But when it comes to a single window, I begin to wonder why all that is really needed. But it seems as though in design, one would think, well, you have to use the same language, same form language. It's debatable, but I'd be happy to talk afterwards about that with anybody. And you can see it here. Now, the delicacy, if you will, of the Holland Hills window is, I think, it's gone. I'm prejudiced, I'm biased. I happen to think it was one of the best parts of Holland Hills. But I think it's a case where when you have structural pieces like this, spanning pieces in compression vertically, masonry walls and all, you see how the windows are now just little punch things in what appears to be a concrete wall. It doesn't really float in a lightweight steel frame at all. That's from the, and then I just put this, Mike, I just put this in to bring these down. These are the unit types, B4s and B2s. So he's still after for variance. He doesn't want to have all the same. And you're going to find in the next project that the same thing occurs. And that's this, the last project is River Park in southwest Washington. The first major housing project built after they tore down most of Southwest, the powers that be in Washington, particularly the people that work underneath that big dome building, felt that it was an embarrassment to drive around Washington and find Southwest the way it was. So everything, nearly everything was demolished. To give you bearings, this is where the metro station is. These are the IMP's Twin Towers. That's the little theater, which eludes me. We talked about it last night. Arena Stage. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, there are two constituent zones for this building. I'm not going to say, or parts. All these low-rise buildings, 2 and 3 stories, many of which have vaulted roofs, and a 9-story slab building, which is really 2 apartment buildings put together. So one of his, I still get these things confused. Let me just finish up. 4th Street is here, Q Street, M Street is here, M Street. And then this is Main Avenue, it comes around. There's the metro stop, there's the theater. There are the pay towers over here, to give you an idea. Now, this is an old photo. If you go down there now, this is completely different, completely different. I'm surprised they don't charge you to walk around on the Ks out here, but maybe they do by now, but it's really quite a change from what was there. So Goodman wrote, in a very telling way, the following: more than 1,000 people live in an 11-acre urban environment with an atmosphere new and unique to their experience. Here in a singular arrangement of townhouses and apartment blocks is a residential colony for pedestrians only. So there, right at the outset, you get the thesis. No cars. Keep the car at bay. Put the horses in the stable and don't trip over them. Its small and intimate streets and places scaled to human dimensions with its clustered barrel vaults recall the serene villages of the Greek islands. A little suspect there, but that's okay. It's surprising to see that. Its visual background and its public places are free of the clutter of vehicles which are restricted to circulation and parking compounds along the perimeter. It's a nice attribute. So you can see in this slide that the number of high-rise buildings, and that has to do with urban land economics, of course. But Goodman was able to, here's the other part of that. Just look at the last part. Visually memorable, this enclave for pedestrians in the heart of a city is called River Park. But he really, this was a project, let me back up a little bit, done by Reynolds Metals Company. Both Alcoa Aluminum and Reynolds Metals were in the market to enlarge their markets into urban construction at the time. And they spent a lot of money. They actually built this, and it's now a cooperative. They sold it to the owners in time for that reason. So the elevator apartments are here. This is one building, and this is the second building. And I'm going to get into those in a moment. You can see the parking spread around. It's a little village. There's an access for cars here and a turnaround. Same thing down here. One curb cut here, second curb cut here. So although the car is not totally displaced and shoved underground, structured parking is extremely expensive, particularly in an urban area like this. Lots of parking behind the apartment building. You could think of this as a wall that separates, and I think some people, critics, complained about that because there are more houses over here. But on the other hand, compositionally, the idea of packing this with apartments and taking care of a good density. See, 384 apartments compared to 135, you could offer two options, at least. Low-rise with a car right out the front of your door. You didn't have to go in a subterranean garage like most of those developments. And it was on 135 acres of land. The apartment building features aluminum windows that are quite large and wonderful. Goodman liked black as a color. So all of the structural perturbances of the columns that march along and the floor plates are painted glass. So they retreat aesthetically on the elevation, and you can see these aluminum grills that were developed especially. It's bent and stamped aluminum on the window walls. Now this is I don't know if you can see this, but I had trouble even reading this. So you see that the corridors. There's not much you can do, usually, the architecture of tall buildings. There really isn't. I mean, you got a core. You have to have fire stairs, one here, a certain number of feet apart. You have to have an elevator bank. They happen here. But if you look at this plan, you also notice that the corridors go from 8 feet to 10 feet. So perspectively, now I'm guessing here, Eric Jenkins is in the audience. You can ask him afterwards if it works. But perspectively, as you walk toward the elevators, the walls are widening. The corridor space itself is widening. Now that puts an onus certainly on the draftsman that has to lay this out, because these plans, I don't know if you can see them, but I want to just spend just a minute or so. These are not vertical. See, they're slightly canted, slightly angled. Well, what do you do in a multi-floored high-rise apartment building? Well, there aren't many things you can do, but Goodman was able, I think, if you really peel back the onion here and look at it layer by layer, he does things like this. Here's a one-bedroom unit. All right, so this is kitchen here, very small, come off the corridor here. You can see the hallway starting to merge here. Here's the fire stair. So you come in, you have this living dining, but you have a movable curtain here. So you can open up the two spaces. The owner can decide, oh, really? That's my time. I'm going to go over. I'm going to use the question and answer time. Right? I didn't see you doing that. Really? You sure you got the right one? Okay. And then B4 is another one that I think is really a nice little hidden gem. And I was just trying to find things that, what did he do that was different? Usually they're all the same thing. Boxes, 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 doors, kitchens, tiny. Two things. When you walk into this unit, this is a unit B5, instead of being able to look right into the bedroom, there's a closet, a little storage closet right there. So you come in and you move around it, and then the view opens up in the balcony. You notice the balcony. They're done in pairs this way. The balcony serves not only the living room here, living dining, but also the bedroom. There are little doors that, have I got the wrong slide? I might have the wrong. No, I don't. But you can walk out to the balcony from the bedroom on both sides. Now, that may seem like it's minor, but just think about it for a minute. First, you have a balcony. And secondly, you can get access to it from the bedroom or from the living room. Housing, aggregate housing like this, multi-unit, usually doesn't afford things like that. These are the panels. I'm going to have to go quickly here, sorry. And then they're big enough, they're about 6 feet, so you can actually use them as space. They're not like the balconies in New York where you find bicycles and barbecues and all that stuff. That's the aluminum grill that I mentioned. I couldn't include, Helmut Jacobi, renderings. He's a German fellow that was the go-to person at this time in architectural history for renderings. Beautifully precise, signed right here, can barely notice it. But this is the view from one of the arcuated, the vaulted units seen here. So he combines the vaults with the flats. The courtyards became the playgrounds for kids, wonderfully landscaped now. Now, this is an early photo, probably from the early 60s, and you see the size of the trees. So they must have brought in some pretty different colors. The screens basically screen the windows that are behind those that exist. Another view of the courtyards are on different levels, and apparently, I was wondering about handicap access. I think these are stairs, but this appears to be a ramp. See, it's all tilted down because you see the slope here. Very verdant. I mean, to have that in the middle of the city is really quite striking. Quite striking. I'll zip through these. And when you enter your unit, you can see here, you go up, it's fairly steep. These are aluminum stairs. There's a unit down below. You can always tell that this is the kitchen because they have the vents. The kitchens get these tiny little windows up above, which is, I think, problematic. If you know, those of you that know Jane Jacobs and the Death and Life of American Cities, I think her critique of this would be, well, how do you police the sidewalks outside if you can't see them, if you're a homeowner? Legitimate question to ask. All aluminum with cement asbestos panels. Another one where you go up for one and you go in for the other. You notice that the light here, this is minor, isn't centered on the space, it's centered on the door. There's just little things like that, that if you look, they're there. Don't have time to go through these, but. And inside, this is a view of the barrel vaulted one. He does something too, I didn't point out in the plans, but very few people try this, to turn the stair on a narrow space sideways and have it go up in the middle. Usually they hug a wall, but he was able to do it. That's why you have some of the treads come down like this, and it becomes a piece of sculpture. Good light, good courtyards outside. You're getting sleepy. I'm just going to cut some of this stuff out, but his designs featured clean, crisp profiles. Absence of surface ornament, large areas of glass, and the innovative use of modern materials. His spatial arrangements minimized circulation space and visually merged inside with outside. Further, his interiors used simple textures, natural materials, and abundant daylight. As residential communities ranging in size from 12-unit subdivisions to complexes with hundreds of low-rise townhouses and apartment buildings, his designs emphasize intelligent land planning, open green spaces, walking trails and playgrounds, and exterior terraces, decks, or balconies for houses and apartments. Moreover, buildings and unit types were designed to provide choice and variety for their occupants while promoting both community and privacy. Goodman was a prolific innovator, believing that, and I quote, "the techniques of modern history conserve man's need for beauty as well as, or even better than, the ancient art of handicraft." From his early explorations of simplified wood detailing and structural systems, to his later experiments with prefabricated components in wood, aluminum, and concrete, he consistently sought to utilize new and improved building materials and construction assemblies. His work is that of a fertile mind of an architect who was unabashedly modern in his creative sensibilities, one who wished to use these talents to enhance the life of those who would experience his buildings and community. to enhance the life of those who would use his buildings and communities. As he once so poignantly noted, to create surroundings conducive to the renewal of the individual spirit is perhaps the highest goal of architecture. Thank you.